Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Melissa Hurtado. I am the interim library director with the Thousand Oaks Library. And I have the distinct pleasure this afternoon to welcome you to this wonderful event. An author, Meredith May, who wrote The Honey Bus, a memoir of loss, courage, and a girl saved by bees. And as you all know, this has been a long wait to get to this point. So we actually kicked off our One City, One Book, Thousand Oaks Read program for this year in February of 2020. And we started off with some programs and events, but as you know, in March of 2020, well, everything kind of went sideways. So unfortunately, we had to close the libraries, and ultimately, we had to postpone this event. So we're really excited to be able to bring this to you today. And so much has happened since that time. Our libraries were put into a position where we had to offer online resources like we had never had before, pivot our services and our programming into virtual platforms. And then in May of last year, we launched the wildly successful curbside pickup service. So, thank you. And that really gave the opportunity for people to come and interact with library staff and get the real physical materials that everybody was just really craving at the time. So, now that our libraries are open, we're able to offer events like this once again, and we're just really excited to be back here. So the Thousand Oaks Library is a department of the City of Thousand Oaks, and we have been privileged to offer the Thousand Oaks Reads program, and it's a citywide literary event encouraging community members to read and discuss the same book. A celebration of selected books include discussion groups and special events inspired by the themes in the book. The goals are to celebrate reading and literature, engage a wide spectrum of the community in thoughtful exchange of ideas and perspectives. It provides a multifaceted array of programs related to literature and the arts, fosters a sense of community, and a driving notion of the program is, when we open a book together, we close it in greater harmony. So the Thousand Oaks Reads One City, One Book is sponsored by the City of Thousand Oaks, our wonderful friends of the Thousand Oaks Library, and is made possible by the efforts of many. So at this time, we'd love to thank those who have made this special event possible and express appreciation to the following. So the Thousand Oaks City Council, the City of Thousand Oaks management team, the Cultural Arts Theater and staff, and TOTV, the Thousand Oaks Library staff, One City, One Book committee members, Friends of the Thousand Oaks Library Board, California Lutheran University, Mary Olson and KCLU Radio, the Hyatt Regency Westlake, To and Fro Car Service, Thousand Oaks Acorn, and Accommodating Ideas Language Access Solutions. So would all of those who have been mentioned here, can you please stand up so we can acknowledge you and give you a hand? Thank you so much. So before we get started, I want to give a shameless plug. It's National Library Card Sign-Up Month. So if you do not already have your Thousand Oaks Library card, we encourage you to go. You can go online to tolibrary.org and start the process, or stop at one of our 2 locations and get your library card. And also, before we get started, I just want to remind you all to please silence your cell phones. And now I would like to introduce to you Mary Olson. She's the general manager of KCLU Radio, and we would like to thank Mary for her contributions to our community and appreciate her willingness to be our host and moderator for today's event. Mary will announce the rest of our program and will be introducing our author and special guest, Meredith May. Well, thank you very much.
I'm from the Midwest. We grow them tall back there, so this has to come up a bit. Well, good afternoon. Welcome. Thank you so much, Melissa. Thank you again to the City of Thousand Oaks and the Thousand Oaks Library, and especially the Friends of Thousand Oaks Library who made this program possible today. I have to tell you, I was so excited. I am so excited to be here today. We live in a great community, but this is so exciting for me. It's all the stuff I love the best. You've got the library, and we have one of the best libraries I've ever been to. The Thousand Oaks Library is so great. I mean, it's wonderful, right? And then you have the coolest people, our librarians, and I really mean that. They are the greatest people. Love the librarians, right? And then the friends of the library, when you go there, everyone wants to help you out, and they're getting the books for sale and the shop that they have. It's so wonderful. So my kids were teasing me. They're like, "You're in nerd heaven, Mom." And I'm like, "Yes, I am. And I'm going to come today and be with my people." So this is going to be a really great time. And I had the pleasure of meeting Meredith backstage. She's fantastic. Wait until you see her presentation. We want to welcome all of you here today, as well as those of you who are joining us digitally via YouTube, because we're that cool. And also want to thank TOTV for recording and streaming this presentation. We have folks at home who weren't able to make it today. A big thank you to Accommodating Ideas Incorporated Language Access Solutions for providing ASL translation for today's event. Each year, the Thousand Oaks Library sponsors this citywide One City, One Book, TO Reads Book Club. And as Melissa mentioned earlier, we're thrilled with how the community embraced the Honey Bus. The Thousand Oaks Reads Book Committee and Book Selection is comprised of Thousand Oaks Library staff and supporters. And the committee searches for books that meet some very specific criteria. High literary quality. They look at reviews, analysis, commentary, and commendations from the publishing industry, librarians, journalists, and educators. They look for universal themes that appeal to a wide range of readers. They look for it to be available in multiple formats, including paperback and audio. And I want a discussable book. So, book clubs and things like that, just what we're doing today, can enjoy it. It'll spark provocative discussions. They want a book that will lend itself to creative public programming related to the book. And finally, author availability and willingness to participate in an author event. The Honey Bus knocked every single one of those categories, 100% and more. Part memoir, part beekeeping odyssey, The Honey Bus is an unforgettable story about finding home in the most unusual of places and how a tiny, little understood insect could save a life. Meredith May is an award-winning journalist and fifth-generation beekeeper. Her 2019 memoir, The Honey Bus, reveals life lessons she learned in her grandfather's Big Sur bee yard that rescued her from a very difficult childhood. This book has been published in 18 countries and translated into 11 languages. Her 2017 book, I, Who Did Not Die, tells the true story of an Iranian child soldier who risked his life to save an enemy fighter during the Iran-Iraq War. During her 16-year career at the San Francisco Chronicle, her reporting won the PEN USA Literary Award for Journalism, the Casey Medal for the Meritorious Journalism, and first-place feature writing awards from the Society of Professional Journalists and the Associated Press. Her series about an Iraqi boy wounded during the Second Gulf War was shortlisted for the Pulitzer Prize. Meredith is a former professor of journalism and podcasting at Mills College in Oakland, California. She lives in the Carmel Valley, where she spends her time writing, volunteering for the Monterey Bay Aquarium as a scuba diver, and of course, beekeeping. Her next memoir, Loving Edie, How a Dog Afraid of Everything Taught Me to Be Brave, will be published in April. Now, friends, let's give a very warm Thousand Oaks welcome to author, journalist, and beekeeper, Meredith May.
Wow, here we are in person, huh? Isn't this great? I really want to give a huge thank you to the Thousand Oaks Library and everybody associated with it, to the theater crew who did a sound check, to the people who picked me up at the airport. Like, everybody has been treating me so well, and it is no small thing to have a whole city choose my book. It is so humbling. Thank you. You know, when I was writing The Honey Bus, I really had no idea if anybody would read it. I mean, it's a funky little book, and it doesn't fit neatly in any particular category. So just to see all you beautiful people right now is really sending my heart sky high. And we live in a time when it's very difficult to make future plans. And I really want to thank the organizers, because this event was put on pause several times. A lot of my book tour turned to Zoom events, and Thousand Oaks said, nope, we're waiting. We're waiting till we're going to do it in person. And I get such an energy about being in the same room with people who have read my book or are going to read my book, that this just is wonderful. Thank you so much. And like Mary said, I want to give a special shout out to librarians. During the pandemic, they jumped into action, as librarians always do, and they figured out curbside drop-off of books. They delivered books to our houses. They rocked the Zoom thing, and they brought all kinds of people into your living rooms. And I don't know where we would be without them. They are first aid responders, in my opinion. And yeah, they're superheroes. So this is my first event that's in person since the pandemic. So I would been very excited to meet you. I want to, before I get started, just take a little pulse of the room and see who's here. So show of hands, how many, do we have any writers in the audience? Yeah? Good. Keep fighting the good fight. How about fans of Big Sur in Carmel Valley? Okay, woof. Grandparents. Yay, a round of applause for the grandparents. What about, do we have any beekeepers? Okay, yes. How about people who just think bees are cool? Okay. So you all found your way to the correct hive. We're all here together. So I will get started. So in the time that I have with you today, I'd like to cover a few things. First, I'd just like to tell you the backstory behind the Honey Bus, how it came to be, and the inspiration for the book. And then I've put together a slideshow for you that will take you on a VIP tour of the Honey Bus, complete with embarrassing childhood photos, because those are always fun. And then also there's something, there are photos in there that are not in the book, so you'll get to see something different and special. But what's really special is I have the only video that exists of my grandfather. So it's just a short 3-minute clip, and for those of you who have read the book already, that might be kind of fun for you to see if he sounds and looks and moves the way you have had in your imagination. And then we are going to have an interview with questions, and that's been mentioned. And then I will meet you to sign your books. So I'd love to hear what's on your mind when we get to that part. So the Honey Bus started as my accidental master's thesis. And what I mean by that is I didn't decide to write my story and then sit down and bang it out. It was not that linear. It was 2009. I was working at the San Francisco Chronicle as a reporter, and I really wanted to get my master's degree. I wanted an MFA. But I couldn't afford to just quit my job for 2 years and study creative nonfiction. So I did some research, and I found that there are these programs called low residency. So I found one in Maryland where you're on campus for just 2 weeks during the summer, and then the rest of the time you spend in a correspondence course with your professor. So I was pretty smug when I showed up at Goucher College in Maryland for the first day of my program, because I had been having conversations with an agent in New York about turning one of my newspaper stories into a book. And this was a story about a doctor, an anesthesiologist to be specific, in California, who had decided to sell everything, including his house, buy an ambulance, and go to Tanzania and drive around in the Maasai neighborhoods giving health care to people who had absolutely no access. Yeah, sounds like a good book, right? But unfortunately, Tracy Kidder wrote a book called Mountains Beyond Mountains right about that time. So the answer that we got back was, we already have that book. But I didn't know this, and I set off to my program, and as part of the graduation requirement, you have to have 150 pages of a book project written. So I thought, well, aren't I smart? I'm going to go to this program, and I'm going to use it to get my book started that I have to write. And I didn't understand anything about book publishing then. I thought if you simply have conversations with an agent about an idea and you say that you will write this book, that means it's going to be published and it'll just happen. So the day I showed up at my school program, I got the call from this agent who said, well, yeah, Tracy Kidder wrote this very popular book that everyone says yours sounds too much like. So I was a little bummed out, and I went to my first class, and at the end of class, the professor said, okay, come to the next class with pages to workshop. And I thought, workshop? That's a noun. And I've never heard that word used as a verb. I mean, you have to understand, I spent 25 years in newspaper journalism, so I'd never taken a writing class, like a literary writing class. So I pulled aside a student to ask, and I chose the guy who had a New York Times bestseller at the time. I thought he might know. And I said, Mike, what is he talking about? And Mike explained that workshop is you bring some pages in progress to class, and you read them aloud, and then you have a critique. And I thought, oh, yeah, right, I knew that. And so I ran back to my dorm room, and I started banging on my computer keyboard. And I wrote the first sentence, I didn't see who threw it. And that actually ended up being a scene in the honey bus. And what I was referring to was a fight my parents had in the kitchen. And I remember a wooden pepper mill, one of those like foot-tall ones, flying across the dining room table. They were having an argument. So, but it would not be until 10 years after I wrote that sentence that the honey bus became a book. I completely rewrote it 3 times. And I struggled because, although I had an unusual childhood, and I knew it might make a good book to be, because my story being raised by a beekeeper, grandfather, with a depressed mother behind a closed door. I knew that that might intrigue some people, but I thought you needed connections in New York. You needed to be born into the right family to get a book published. I just, after that first failure, I just felt very frustrated, like an outsider in a newsroom trying to bang on the door of New York. But I kept working on it, and the first version came out, and the first version was a monster mom memoir. We know what those are, right? Each chapter is something she'd done wrong to you, right? It's like exhibit A, B, C, why I want you to side with me against my mother. And, while that was therapeutic, and probably necessary for me to organize my thoughts. If we're being really honest, that is only interesting to an audience of approximately one. So I needed to mature as a daughter and as a writer before I could write something that wasn't just one big long complaint. So I rewrote it, and I finally got an agent, and she was interested in selling it. She was a junior agent. She had never sold a book before, and I told her I hadn't either, so we're probably a good team. And she sent the book out to a dozen or so publishers, and it almost sold, but everyone said, it's good, the writing's good, this girl can write, but it's just like missing something. And nobody could say what that something was, and I couldn't either, but I kind of agreed with them. It felt like I was close, but just not there. And then a very magical thing happened. Now it's 2011, and I'm on version 3. No, wait, I'm struggling after version 2, and I'm depressed, and I'm thinking that there's no way I'm going to get this book off the ground. Because if my agent told me, if you try to sell a book and you don't sell it, you can't just sort of wait a while and then try to sneak it back out again, thinking that the editors have changed at the houses and no one will recognize it. You can't do that. So it's pretty much dead in the water. And I didn't know if I had the energy to make my book different or rewrite it or come up with a totally new idea. And so I was just eating a lot of chocolate at this period. So then it's 2011, and my grandfather was becoming very frail. He was in his 80s, and he could no longer lift the boxes of honey on the top of a beehive, because when the bees fill the honeycomb, they can weigh those boxes about 50 pounds. So after 70 years as a beekeeper, he reluctantly retired, and it totally changed his personality. I mean, for the first time, I saw my grandfather sad. And I remember telling him, Grandpa, you're like a cowboy who lost his horse. So I started thinking about it, and I thought, well, what if I become a beekeeper? Like, yes, I work full-time at the San Francisco Chronicle, and I live in the city, but I will figure a way out. And luckily, there was another editor at the paper who had the same idea. She wanted to try rooftop beekeeping. So we had probably a year of careful negotiations with our bosses, and finally we got permission to put 2 hives on the roof of the San Francisco Chronicle. And this is at 5th and Mission, which is one of the busiest intersections in the city. There are 4 bus stops, there are parking garages, restaurants, bars, and a Bloomingdale's. So it was perfect. But actually it was kind of perfect because we had a rooftop garden up there with vegetables and fruit trees that the food writers would use in their test kitchen when they try recipes. So it actually was quite yummy for the bees up there. And side note, because I think you're probably wondering this right now, the one question I got asked a lot about those hives was, where do the bees get their food in the middle of a metropolis? And actually, it's easier to be a city bee than a country bee. And I know that seems counterintuitive, but bees will fly in a 5-mile radius of their hives looking for forage. And in the country, you typically have a few things that bloom at the same time every year and then die back. And so there's a lot of competition for food in the country. City bees, on the other hand, they feast on a year-round buffet of ornamental imported plants that city dwellers bring into the city, so they never really have to compete. There's a lot to eat. And plus there's water. There's water in the gutters, in the sprinklers, in the puddles, fountains. So yeah, they did find I wasn't being cruel. So the day that our bees arrived, they come in these travel cages that are wood with screen mesh on the side. A crowd of coworkers had gathered to document the moment. There were photographers, videographers, and I was going to write a story. When I held bees again after 30 years, their vibration just traveled straight from my palms and just directly into my heart. And everything about them was so familiar. Their smell. Honeybees smell like warm toast. Their buzz, I remembered the song of that. And all these sensory things were happening to me at once. And I started weeping in the middle of all of this. And it was all so familiar yet so personal to me. And I don't know, my coworkers must have thought I was getting horribly stung or having a little meltdown of some kind, but I thought to myself, I can't explain what's happening to me in a soundbite, but I could explain this in a book. I could explain why my happy place is in the middle of a cloud of stinging insects. So the book coalesced. It coalesced into a story about how these creatures saved me at a very vulnerable time in my life, and how my grandfather's relationship with honeybees taught me to be a better person. So it was pretty instant at that moment that the bees moved from set decoration in my story to center stage. So I wrote it a third time. But this time it came out pretty quickly, and third time was a charm. As Mary said, 18 countries picked it up, besides the US, and Thousand Oaks chose it for their entire city to read and put all this programming behind it. And I'm standing here looking out at all of you. So for the writers, especially in the audience, I want you to know that I failed my way to this stage. And, you know, it's not about how many no's you hear in your life, it's about how many times you get back up. So that's how my bumpy road to getting my book published. And now what I'd like to do is take you all back to 1970s Big Sur. That sounds kind of fun, doesn't it? Yeah. So I'm going to switch over to the slideshow, and I've got my little thingy here, and we'll see if this, oh, it's already up. So this is the hardcover. This is the one that came out in 2019, and this is Grandpa's actual honey bus on the cover. We went through 5 covers before we landed on this one. The first ones were very botanical. They had flowers, they had pretty bees. One had this like luscious jar of honey with the sun shining through it. And they were just not hitting the right tone for me. They were just too pretty to match my story. So I'm glad that we eventually landed here. But the 3 bees in the corner, we were just about ready to start printing books, and I looked a little closer, and I saw that they each had 2 wings apiece, which would make them what? Flies, not honeybees. So I called my editor, and I said, you have got to draw some more wings on those insects pronto. And, you know, I never found out how much it cost to stop everything and redo that. But can you imagine what a doozy that would be for the rest of my life, having beekeepers tell me I have flies on the cover of my book? Yeah. There we go. And then a year later, the paperback version came out. And as you can see, it looks different. It's not uncommon to have a different paperback. Sometimes it looks a little closer. It's just like a tweak of the hardback. But they wanted to do this because the reader response to my grandfather was so strong. And I'm super happy they did this, too, because I love our body language. Like, Grandpa's this pillar, and I'm just hanging off of him. And, I've got this expression like, this is my homie, And our hands are just naturally on top of one another. And my brother Matthew would like you to know he's on my grandfather's other knee, but he was brutally cropped out by the literary world. Okay, I told him I would tell you. I wanted to show you the Chronicle roof. That's me, and that's really early on when we had our bees. And you can see the Intercontinental looming in the background. Okay, so when I was writing the honey bus, that was me probably doing a college paper in the 80s, and that was the second Mac ever made. But I didn't have a modern picture of me working, so you get the gist. That was me a long time ago. Flying toasters, anyone? Yeah? So when I was writing my book, I had the hardest time coming up with an elevator pitch for it. An elevator pitch is like 1 or 2 sentences that are supposed to summarizes your work, and they're supposed to be so tantalizing that if you just happen to step into an elevator with Spike Lee or George Lucas, you can pitch your story, and by the time you get out of the elevator, they've bought it, right? Well, I struggled because I was too close to what I had written, and my book had so many themes going on at once that I couldn't summarize it. And that was like the scariest question to me as an author is, what's your book about? You would think that's the easiest one. It's the hardest one, trust me. But it wasn't until the book actually was published and people started reading it and reviewers writing about it, and then I would read what they thought my book was about, and then I understood what I had written. So thanks to that feedback loop, I now know that the Honey Bus is about the little bond, the special bond between little girls and grandpas. It's about the ancient wisdom of bees. It's about losing a mother to mental illness. And it's a love letter to the 70s. And my mom actually had a porta-potty blue gremlin with white stripes. We were all listening to the Bee Gees on 8-track and drinking Tab. It's okay, we all did it, no shame. And the story starts when I'm 5, and like a lot of kids in the 70s, my parents divorced. Only in my case, it sent my mom down a downward spiral from which she never returned. And my brother Matthew was 3 at the time. We were living in Newport, Rhode Island, because my dad was stationed there with the Navy, and we lived in this exact house. It was a duplex, and we were on the left side. And I remember that big fight in the kitchen with the pepper grinder? Yeah, that happened. And then shortly after that, I found myself on an airplane with my mother and baby brother. And when the plane landed, we were in Carmel Valley, California. And then the 3 of us moved into my grandparents' tiny red house. My mom relocated to her childhood bedroom along with me and my brother. So I shared a bed with my mom, and my brother slept in a cot at the foot of the bed. And that was our living arrangement for the next decade as my mom slipped into a marathon melancholy, and nobody mentioned my father ever again. And this picture, my father and I kind of laugh at it now. He's 25, and I have this expression like, I don't think this is the right way to hold a baby. I think that's how you hold a chicken, not a child. But anyway, when you look at pictures of me from like 0 to 5, I always have this like very stern adult look, and even as a little kid. So my grandmother became absorbed in my mother's problems, and so we gravitated toward my grandfather, who was an eccentric mountain man, and he had more than 100 hives tucked into the remote canyons along the Big Sur coast. He was also a plumber, and we had lots of piles of spare parts that might come in handy someday. He was the guy who could tap the natural spring or the creek in Big Sur and gravity feed it to your redwood cabin. And people also said he looked like Mark Twain. So that's the Twainiest photo I have of him. And we didn't get new things very often. And when we did, they were very special. And this was a birthday present or Christmas gift. And he didn't want to scratch it. So it stayed in the living room for quite some time. And then he started watching his programs at night in it. So he's either right now watching Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom or Jacques Cousteau, one of the two. And then we had this red rotary telephone in the kitchen. And every spring it would start ringing off the hook with people saying they had honeybee swarms in their trees, the walls of their houses. And Grandpa and I were like Batman and Robin. We'd drop everything and we would run to his bee truck and race down there to try to get them before they flew away, because he wanted to add them to his collection. And this will look familiar to a lot of you. This is Coast Highway 1 in Big Sur, and this is where we would go chasing bees until we got to this road, which is Palo Colorado Canyon, and we'd turn left away from the ocean, go through the eucalyptus trees, and go up and up and up and up and up until the road turned into that. And we always had to carry a chainsaw with us because sometimes there were trees across the road. We had to drive through creeks, and sometimes we got stuck and we'd have to hike out and call a friend to get us out with a winch. And I loved it. As a little kid, this was like super exciting. I remember he would honk the horn when he went around the corners, because this is, in Big Sur terminology, that's a 2-lane road. And to give you some perspective, this is a Google map I made, and you can see the Coast Highway along the left, and I put a yellow pin where his apiary, one of his apiaries was, and that's in the bottom of Garrapatta Canyon. And as you can see, it's definitely a 4-wheel drive situation. And you're probably asking yourself, why do that to yourself? Why make it a little easier? Grandpa had a lot of reasons for that. One, the canyon buffeted the hives from wind. 2, if they're pretty remote, that means curious people are not going to come tip it over. Also, there's a water source. There's a Garrapatta Creek that runs through there. But the main reason was the vegetation. The area is covered with wild sage, and all the bees had to do was come out, fly to the top of the ridge, and start feasting. And as their bellies got heavier and heavier, they would just sink down lower and lower and land on their front door. And people who are really into honey really like sage honey. It is very clear. It can look like water in some cases. It has the right ratio of fructose and glucose so that it never crystallizes. So honey fans love Big Sur sage honey. They love Tupelo honey from the bayou and Manuka from New Zealand. Those are like the premier honeys. So that was the bee yard in Garrapatta, and that's where Grandpa would bring me in the 70s to apprentice. And it looks like the hive in the foreground is getting ready to swarm. And he made all his own equipment out of redwood on his property. So those are some of his boxes he made. And we also kept a few hives in his backyard in Carmel Valley. Well, a few in Grandpa terminology would be like 20. And what do you notice about his safety gear? Yeah. So he had a theory that beekeepers believe this, some do, that bee venom prevents arthritis. He never had it, and my grandmother, who never went near the hives, did have it, so that was his scientific proof. But a lot of beekeepers don't wear gloves, and it's because it forces you to be more gentle around the bees. You have to be more careful where you put your hands, and then you can also feel their vibration, and you can tell if they're agitated or calm. So that was why he did it. So when I was beekeeping with Grandpa, he showed me how honeybees make sacrifices for the whole colony. And I witnessed the maternal bond between the queen bee and her worker bee daughters. While the queen is the only bee in the hive that can lay eggs, she can't feed herself or keep warm at night. So she relies on her daughters to bring her water and nectar and cuddle around her at night. So I think, I get asked about the red dot. That is beekeepers mark their queens with, there's a special pen, so it makes it easier to find them when you're inspecting. But also, if you notice, all those worker bees, they're all female around her. They are all facing inward, and they touch her with their antenna. And then they, in turn, go ahead and touch other bees with their antenna and pass the queen's pheromone around everybody in the hive. And that's how each hive has an individual scent. And that's one of the ways bees are able to navigate and pick out their hive in a big apiary of 100 hives. So when you're beekeeping, you look for that daisy, and that'll bring you most likely to the queen. So Grandpa and his bees, they modeled the love and the generosity that was missing from my life, and then slowly, over time, I learned how to trust again. And there's Matthew, not cropped out, of the same photo, different photo, same day. I'm wearing the same outfit. And the title of the book comes from a World War II Army bus that was in our backyard. He tore out all the seats and built his honey factory inside out of old spare junk. And he got the bus from a friend in Big Sur who bought it at auction at the Fort Ord military base. After the war, they had a lot of surplus. And Grandpa's idea was that he was going to drive this thing to his hives and extract honey on the spot, rather than driving to Big Sur, bringing the honey back home, extracting it, taking the frames back. Well, you know he couldn't get that thing up that road I showed you, right? So he figured that out. It was not going to work, and it was very expensive to put gas in it, he figured out. So he ended up parking it here, and to my grandmother's great chagrin. And I put a Where's Waldo arrow, show you in relation to the house. And here's a closer view of the back of it. And that's where it sat for the next 60 years. He tore out the engine and gave it to a friend for his truck. And I just want to call your attention to the middle ground. See, there's like a cylindrical thing next to the bus. That inside that cylinder is a propane tank. On top of it is a tea kettle. Coming off the spout is a tube. And he ran the tube through a hole in the side of the bus and taped it to the handle of a knife to heat the knife. and the knife he used to cut open wax honeycomb frames. So that's kind of how my grandpa rolls. He never bought anything. He made everything. And it was always like safety third with my grandpa. But, you know, price-wise, conscious first, right? So that's what it looked like inside. And you can see it's pretty DIY and not OSHA approved. Those Wesson oil cans stacked in the side are 5 gallons, and he would fill those, and we'd sell those to customers. And this is the spinner. This is where you put the wooden frames of honeycomb, and then by centrifugal force, the honey flies out and drips down the sides. So those are the frames that they're like, think of hanging file folders in a file cabinet. So they're wooden hanging frames. And there he is with his hot knife. So bees put a thin layer of wax over the honeycomb, over the honey, to keep it in the honeycomb. So you have to first do this like cheese slice thing to get it open before it goes in the spinner. And you were very lucky he's wearing pants. It got really hot in the summertime, and we would have to keep all the windows and doors closed because the bees can smell what we're doing in there, and they would rush in to try to get their honey back. So he would often just strip down to his BVDs and his Chuck Taylors and work that way. So it took a while to find a G-rated photo. And then there's a pump at the bottom of the spinner that sends the honey up through a network of galvanized steel plumbing pipes that were suspended from the ceiling with fishing wire. And then the honey emptied over 2 50-gallon barrels that had cheesecloth stretched across the top. And that was the filtration system. And then the whole thing was powered by an engine he ripped out of a lawnmower. So every summer we harvested honey inside the bus, and the bus doubled not only as my workspace, but as my confessional. It was the one place where I could talk about my problems away from the rest of the family, away from the world, really. And Grandpa would listen, and he would talk to me. But he wouldn't speak to me directly. He would talk to me in bee stories. He would tell me about how bees solved problems. And I remember we talked a lot about the scout bee. And I'm sure you've heard that bees dance to communicate, right? So they'll go, scouts will find the flowers, they'll come back, and they'll do a dance inside the hive. And the intensity of the dance, the duration of the dance, and the direction of the dance in relation to the sun all triangulate to form like GPS coordinates for the other bees to know where to go to get that. I know, right? It's above my pay grade. I don't get it. But so if you've never seen a bee doing this dance, it's called a waggle dance. You're in luck because I caught a bee dancing in my own hive, and so I have a little short video clip that I'll show you what it looks like. Yeah, like what's a slideshow presentation without a little disco interlude, right? I made these little silly videos for my publisher to promote the book, and I was having a little fun with that. But so you saw there were 2 yellow balls on that bee's leg. That was pollen, and she was basically saying, look what I got, look where it is, you know. So scout bees search out flowers, but the other thing they do is they search out new homes for the colony. If there's something wrong with the current hive, it's either too drafty, It's too overcrowded. So what they'll do is they'll dance to let the other bees know the address of the better home they've found. And then, I don't know, the bees have a meeting or something, and they decide on a given day and time when to leave the hive with the queen to go to their better home. And that's when you see one of these. And I don't know if you've ever seen a honeybee swarm, but it's biblical, right? I mean, the whole air thrums, and it's pretty fast. They're there, and then they're gone. So what I realize now, what my grandfather was trying to say to me when he was talking to me about the Scouts, is that maybe the home I had wasn't the most perfect place for me, but there was another home out there waiting for me if I took the initiative to go find it. So he was giving a little girl a concept of a future, and he was also giving me hope. So lastly, I'd like to end with Grandpa in his own words. And this is that 3-minute video I promised. I shot it with a flip camera, if anyone remembers. Those were around for a hot minute. So it's handheld, it's shaky, sounds awful, but I think it speaks to Grandpa's spirit. So here we go.
You don't handle them in a jerky motion or anything. You kind of do handle them smoothly, you know, so they don't realize something's going on.
So let me ask you why you like beekeeping.
Well, it's interesting.
Yeah.
It's just interesting. It's a good outlet. It's nice and quiet. Nobody bothers me. And I do like to sell the honey because people really appreciate it. Yeah, there's a new one.
Ooh, let's see.
Aren't they pretty?
Ooh, yeah. Can you hold it up to the light? Mm-hmm.
Customers that are special customers that runs the pump down here. This is a pump. And the pump pumps up June to a filter.
Mm.
And I have cheesecloth for the honey to come up through, and that way I get rid of all the stray bee parts, pieces of wax or whatever might be in it, and it comes out clean out the bottom. And leave it set for a few days, and all of the air bubbles go out. To take care of a sting like that, Meredith, you go like that.
And you scrape it sideways?
Yeah, because if you get it that way, you squeeze all the venom in.
Like a syringe, you'll just...
Yeah, if I went and grabbed it like that, it'd squeeze it, you know. Just...
I'm hearing good news that the bees are starting to come back.
Well, they're learning more about them and about what's wrong, and I think they're just stressed. A lot of it is stress because they move them all over and they just really work the bees, and moving them like that doesn't do them any good. Like my bees, I never have had hive die off because of anything like that because I'm not moving my bees. But
Now that bee that's buzzing around you right now, is that like a guard bee that comes all the way from the hive to, like the one that's buzzing around me now?
yeah,
Okay. You can hear it. Woo!
I think we better come.
Time to leave. Yeah, I love that look. He's just got this smirk. He's laughing at me, waiting for me to get stung, you know. He's just having fun with that. So thank you so much for listening to me and for coming today. And I really look forward to your questions and signing books and finding out a little more about you. Thank you.
Wasn't that incredible? Yes. I think we all probably wish we had seen that video, Meredith, of your grandpa and how to successfully take out a stinger prior to today. Because I realize now I was injecting stinging juice into my children when I thought I was helping them. So that was helpful. Well, you guys came up with some great questions. You know, when you came in, so many of you filled out these forms. So, Meredith, we've got some great questions from the audience, and they kind of fell into two different categories. There was the bee-centered questions, and then there were the personal-centered questions. So I thought we would mix it up a little bit and do some of each.
Great.
Okay. Growing up in a non-conventional, sometimes chaotic environment, what effects from that childhood, your childhood, have carried over into your adult life?
Wow, let's get to it.
Let's do
okay,
it.
let's do it. I think no question is too personal when you write a memoir. Can you imagine saying, "Oh no, I can't answer that"? I think, well, and this is, let's see, there we go. Well, I don't have children, and my brother doesn't have children either. And we had a discussion about this recently, and I think both of us were afraid to, because our mother was really not happy as a mother, and both of us wonder how much of that we inherited, how much of that is in our DNA. And we both know what it's like to be a child that is begging for a mother's attention, and we don't want to do that to another child. So my brother and I are really awesome aunts and uncles. But I think that definitely has carried over into maybe subconsciously both of our decision not to have children.
Didn't your grandpa sort of fill that role for you, that nurturing part that you couldn't get from your mom or your grandma?
Exactly. Like, if he hadn't been there, I do not want to know what I would be doing today or my brother would be doing today. I wonder about that. Mm-hmm. But that's sort of the message of the book, is that it doesn't have to be a blood relative. You know, it's alternative family is just one person who reaches out to a young person in need. And it could be a teacher, you know, it could be an insect, it could be a honeybee, it could be the natural world, but just something that sees you. Yeah, so without my grandfather, I think I would have struggled a lot more.
One of the questions that someone wrote down, and she said, your grandfather gave you many, many gifts, but out of all of them, what was the greatest gift he gave you? And you just said a phrase, you felt seen by him. How would you characterize the greatest gift he gave you?
Okay, after my grandfather passed, I was the one who went through his things and was sort of the point person for that. And so many people came up to me after he passed in 2015, but then also after the book came out, and I'm talking about locally in Big Sur in Carmel Valley, so many people knew him. I don't know how he had time to have this many relationships. Like the Caltrans guy said, oh yeah, we had a standing lunch date in my truck. And everywhere I go on the Monterey Peninsula, if I meet somebody new who's lived in the area a while, hi, how are you? My name's Meredith. But if I say, did you know Frank Peace? Yes, I'm his granddaughter. Oh, okay, then doors open for me. He's like my secret VIP card. So I would say the biggest gift he gave me is understanding what leaving a legacy means. And it doesn't mean being successful in the traditional term. It means being good and having so many people benefit by having known you.
That's beautiful. Someone in the audience touched on a question about your father, and I remember this part of the book as well. You chose not to live with your father when your father and his new wife were welcoming to you if you wanted to come and live with them. So this a friend in the audience wants to know why. What really motivated that choice?
Yeah, I remember that. There was a scene in the book where I hadn't seen my father in 2 years since the divorce, and then he bought a plane ticket and flew me out. And while I was there, he asked if I'd rather stay and not go home. And I was completely thrown by the question because I hadn't thought it was possible. I thought it felt sneaky somehow if I said yes and hadn't talked it over with my mom and my grandmother, and I didn't want to leave my grandpa, and I didn't want to leave my little brother behind. He couldn't fly with me because he was 5 and you had to be 7. So I didn't have enough time to actually think about it, and it felt like collusion with my father, and so I said no. Yeah.
Do you think that was the right decision?
Now I do, definitely. I love California. I can't imagine growing up in muggy Rhode Island. My father, I think my father he's very strict. He's, former military. I think he would have had a hard time with me. I sort of go left when everyone goes right. So I think it would have been more strict. Like, even though I chose to stay, there was one thing about not having a lot of supervision that was kind of cool for me growing up. Mm-hmm. Whatever I wanted to be was fine. Wherever I wanted to go, I could hang out with my friends and go anywhere. So there was, in some ways, I used it to my advantage.
Let's talk about Matthew. Matthew, your little brother. First of all, could you just kind of tell us what Matthew is doing, where he is, what he's doing, and then someone wrote something very interesting. What was the legacy of bees in Matthew's life?
Oh, I've never been asked that before. Good question.
Whoever wrote that, great job.
A+.
You're taking my job from
There,
me.
I see you.
Yay!
That's the number one question I get asked is whatever happened to Matthew, and I think that I giggle about it now because it's obviously an oversight on my part. I should have included that maybe in the afterword. So now I answer it over and over. But he is doing great. He ended up going to Cal Poly. He went to Monterey Peninsula College and then transferred to Cal Poly. And his major has something to do about color theory. I don't get it. But and he lives in San Mateo now. He is a wonderful photographer. For a while there, he was represented by SanDisk, back when we all had discs in our cameras, and he was their wedding photographer, and he was flying around the world shooting these amazing weddings in India that involved elephants, and it was incredible. And now he works for Apple, so it's kind of like the CIA. He can't tell me exactly what he does. All I know is that he can fix my computer when it's broken. And he's married, and she also works for Apple, and they are doing great. They love to travel, and they just got back from their 6th trip to Alaska to look at the Northern Lights.
Does he do anything with bees at all?
Yes, good question. The answer is no. That's easy. I always ask him, too, when he visits, do you want to go open the bees with me and go look at them? And he's like, nah, that's all right. So I don't know. It didn't hit him the way it hit me.
Let's segue on. Let's buzz on over to the bee questions. I know it was cheesy, but I've been waiting all day to do that.
No, you go.
Okay.
You go.
Okay. Someone would like to know why different flowers create different honey tastes.
Oh, okay. Well, it's their nectars are different, and each nectar has different ratios of fructose and glucose in there. So you're gonna get a different texture. Some will crystallize, some won't. but it's just the same thing as like why cilantro and mint taste slightly different. So like those don't make honey, but just imagine they did. One would end up tasting like mint, and the other one tastes a little note of cilantro. So that's why. I mean, I've tasted honeys. People bring me honey from their travels, and I've tasted honeys that taste like barbecued pork. And there's it's just this huge variety of honey. And there is actually this honey flavor wheel. And, you can really get into it like wine tasting and say, this one has marshmallow and that one has grass. And that's kind of fun. So when the book
Can
came...
I do that while I'm drinking wine?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
No, mead actually goes better with... But when the book came out and I was visiting a lot of bookstores and having events, I would bring the wheel and I'd bring a bunch of honeys and just have a little after party. It was fun.
You party hard, girl.
I do.
Tasting that honey. Okay. I think this is such a clever question. Do you listen to music when you write? Flight of the Bumblebee, maybe? Or do you write to the sound of the bees?
Oh, that's funny. I do listen to music when I write. I have a treadmill desk, and so but I put it on the lowest setting possible, so I'm walking very zombie slow, so I don't trip. And it depends on my mood. I like classical a lot. It depends on where I am in the book or if it's an easy or hard part. So it's either classical or it's 70s singer-songwriter if I'm going back to that time in my childhood, or if I'm frustrated, it's like AC/DC or something like that.
Do you get together regularly with your dad?
I wouldn't say regularly, but I did see him 2 weeks ago. I was back east visiting my nephews and niece, and he came. I see him probably once every couple of years. Either I will visit him. He surprised me once at a book reading at the Monterey Library. He just waltzed in. And so I had him stand up, and everyone acknowledged him. He's very, very supportive of the book, and I really appreciate that.
Nice. Do you have more than one hive, and is it in San Francisco still?
Not in San Francisco. I left the newspaper in 2015, and so I took the hives with me because I didn't trust anybody to take care of them after I was gone. And I moved them to a community garden in San Francisco, where another beekeeper friend of mine, I actually call him my beekeeper husband, Aaron, he and I love to beekeep together. So my 2 joined his 4, and we had 6 in this garden. And then I moved to Carmel Valley 2 years ago, and I just let him keep them because it's kind of a pain to move 90,000 bees, and they acclimate to their surroundings. So it would have been kind of mean to move them from a foggy city to Carmel Valley. But funny story, not funny, but kind of hair stand up on your arms, interesting. A few days after I moved into Carmel Valley, the neighbor's oak tree fell over and cracked open. It was full of bees. And he said, "Hey, I heard you know something about this." And I collected them. So I 100% believe that was a housewarming gift from my grandpa.
Your grandpa.
Yeah.
Sure. I have a couple of questions. I absolutely loved your book. I did. I loved it. I've recommended it to many, many people. I have to tell you, I didn't think it was easy to read for me because you drew us in so deeply that I worried about you and Matthew the whole time I was reading the book. And even after it was over, we closed the last page, I was angry at your mother and your grandmother. Mm-hmm. And I think many people who had survived that, and I think you did survived that, would have closed that chapter and not examined it. But you decided to examine it and go big and go public with it. So the honey bus is your story, but what was the very hardest part for you personally in opening yourself up enough to tell that story?
Well, I sort of did it for therapy. So it was, a little bit selfish, I would say. I think actually any memoirist is really trying to work something out of their system. And hopefully it's something that would be readable to other people. But to answer your question, I was worried about my father's reaction because, he basically disappeared, when I was young. And my relationship with him was, during this period, was more like an uncle I saw every once in a while. And my father always says, I wish I'd stayed in California. He really regrets a lot of what happened in that period. So I really worried that reviewers would say mean things about him and he would read it. My mother, my grandmother, my grandfather had all passed by the time the book came out. But that didn't happen, with one exception. Amazon put a review on that upset him. But the thing was, the opposite happened. My father got to read my version of the story. And my father remarried and had 2 more sons. And they always knew something had happened with Dad's first family, but didn't know the particulars. So they got to read it. And it brought us all closer. Now there's not this secret that we're worried about offending each other. And we all know, and it's actually been more lovely.
Your book contains so many wonderful conversations, so many poignant conversations between you and your grandpa. And it's hard, I watched that video and I've seen it before, and how could you not love your grandpa? Oh my gosh, he's amazing. But I think that the most poignant exchange in the book came between you and your mom. I just want to remind you of a passage. She called you and she said to you, "I'm going to die soon and we've never had a good relationship. I want to know what you can say to me to make me feel better about that." Your response was so incredibly gracious and kind. You said, "We're okay, Mom. There's nothing to worry about anymore." You went on to say, "I think I meant it. The last thing I wanted to do was break my broken mother even further." Could you explore that conversation a little bit more with us? And do you still feel that way, Meredith? Or if you could go back in time, would you have said something else to her? And if so, what would that have been?
Yeah, I get asked a lot, what sort of mental illness do you think your mom had? And, I think it's definitely, and I've had therapists in the office, in the audience tell me what they think, probably some of you. But I think she had a narcissistic personality disorder. She was the kind of person where she thought a conversation was just waiting for your turn to talk. There was just no listening and absorbing another person. It was really difficult. And I remember that so clearly because she stayed true to herself to the end. And, I do think she wishes that we'd had a better relationship, but she just wanted it instantly. She just didn't understand her role in getting that. But I think towards the end, like I was saying earlier, I needed to mature as a daughter to write the book. That scene was definitely not in the book in the first version, and I needed to come to terms with maybe what her story was. She grew up in the 50s and 60s, and, maybe my mother, like me, wasn't cut out for motherhood, but the world around her told her that's her only option, and I try to flip it around and think about that, and would I be a frustrated person? Or, also my mom needed a therapist, and, when she grew up, women weren't listened to as much. They were just hysterical. and told to go take a nap or, a barbiturate or something. And so, she really, really struggled. And additionally, her father was very cruel to her, and sort of beat the self-love out of her as a very young girl. So I need to keep those things in my mind and be kinder to her.
It's fascinating that the pendulum swung with you to the other side, because your profession as a journalist and now as a writer is to absolutely listen to other people and to take them all in so you can reflect back their thoughts, their dreams, their conversations. I think that is a beautiful testament to how you've healed in a big way. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
I have a couple bee questions here. And by the way, you see me looking at my watch. It's not because I'm bored. I'm having the best time of my life. It's that those librarians I was bragging about, you know how in the beginning I said, I love librarians. They're the greatest people in the world. But there's a spunky side to them. And if you go past the time they tell you, I don't want to face them backstage. So that's why I'm doing this, because you don't want an angry librarian, okay?
They are on time. Those librarians are on time.
You're a fifth-generation beekeeper. What is something, just one thing, give us something that we can take with us that all of us can do to help our friends, the bees?
Yeah, and it's going to sound very big, sir, hippy-dippy, but it's actually true. Plant native wildflowers wherever you can. The bees are losing their forage as we, build over meadows, and also as the planet is getting warmer. Flowers are not producing as much nectar as they once did, or for as long as they once did. So, when I talk to little kids, I always bring these seed balls, and they're like little mud balls like this, and you can get them native to where you live, seedballs.com. And then we go plant them afterwards. And I turn these kids into little guerrilla wildflower planters. I'm like, don't just put them in your yard, like put them in unusual places, like the median on the road or near the grocery store, or toss them in your neighbor's yard when they're not looking. And, yeah, I think just reseeding is the first thing that's most needed. And then, can I have two?
Absolutely.
Okay. The second one is when you or somebody you know gets a honeybee swarm in your property, do not call the exterminator. Know that they will charge you money and kill all the bees. What you need to do is call your local county beekeeping club, and everyone has one, and they're on the internet, and they have a list of beekeepers who are jumping at the bit to go get those bees from you for free. So call a beekeeper.
Plant wildflowers, call a beekeeper. Got it, okay. What did we forget collectively, or did I forget to ask you? What is one question that we should have asked, and we didn't? What is that, and would you answer it, please?
I have another book coming out.
Please tell us about it.
So self-serving. I wrote another memoir, which is kind of embarrassing, because I'm that self-involved. I have a little card with the covers out already, and I can give them to you at the signing table. It's called Loving Edie, and you mentioned it, Mary, and I'll just tell you about it. It's about getting a golden retriever puppy, and my third one I've had, and this one turns out to have an anxiety disorder, and she's on Prozac, and she has backup Xanax, and yes, I have the Thundercert, and yes, I have CBD chews, and yes, I have pheromone spray and calming probiotic powder. No, seriously, this is something that I have never experienced before, and learning how to not be disappointed by that, and to get behind it and really alter my whole life. Like, my dog cannot take a walk. It's too scary. And to learn to love her, not in spite of, but because of her disability. is what the book's about. So in a way, it's like learning how to be a mom of sorts, which you'll find out is like very frightening to me. So it comes out, they have a date. It is April
19th.
Thank you, 19. And I'm really looking forward to it. It's going to be fun.
Well, we look forward to reading it.
Yeah.
That sounds great. Thank you so much for coming. This was a real treat for our community and for all the friends at the Thousand Oaks Library and just all of us. And thank you for just making yourself open and to answering our questions. We appreciated that so much. You taught us about bees, your beekeeping. You shared your wonderful grandpa with us. We thank you so much for that. Getting to hear you speak in person has really been a treat and a delight, I think,
Thank
for
you.
all of us. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. And you're a great interviewer. I'm so
You're very
comfortable with you.
kind. Thank you. That's very kind of you. A big thank you to everyone for participating here with us today. Tell your friends and neighbors for next year and the future ones as well. A big thank you to the City of Thousand Oaks YouTube channel. Once again, a special acknowledgement to the Friends of the Library, who are the greatest people for sponsoring this program, and all the wonderful librarians. And then just a very quick note, friends. As you exit, just please put your masks on, make sure they're on, and stay on. Be aware of social distancing as you move through the lobby. You'll be asked and reminded by city staff to wear a mask for your own safety and the safety of others. For those of you who would like to purchase a copy, the Friends of the Library will have copies of The Honey Bus on sale in the lobby, and Meredith May will be signing books in the lobby. So Meredith is about to exit the stage, and I would like her to exit the stage with us giving her a big Thousand Oaks, Ventura County round of applause.